This is Land of Havilah, Exodus 17. Coming up, Israel's on the move again, following Yahweh's pillar in the wilderness. A lot of them don't like following Yahweh. They're thinking this is insane. Verse 1. All the congregation of the children of Israel traveled from the wilderness of sin by their journeys, according to Yahweh's commandment, and encamped in Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Comment, they're at Rephidim. The location's unknown to us. There's manna 6 mornings a week, but what good's that with no water? Verse 2. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test Yahweh?" Comment, sometimes the best way to teach or correct is by asking another question. Moses asked, "Why do you quarrel with me?" Moses didn't lead them here. Yahweh's pillar did. The people can see that for themselves. So what's the quarrel with Moses? Moses' second question was, "Why do you test Yahweh?" That was a good question, seeing Yahweh's passed every test so far. There have been too many miracles to count since Yahweh first said he was going to bring them out. Yahweh provided water at Marah already, when they thought they would die of thirst. Where's their memory? In the feast of the Passover, God already told them remembrance is key. He said, "Remember what I've done for you, like it's written on your hand or written between your eyes." They ought to be looking forward to seeing another miracle. How much better would it be for them to say, "Wow, let's watch and see what Yahweh does this time"? How many tests does Yahweh have to pass until they take on an attitude of endurance, patience, confidence, and trust, even a sense of invincibility? Maybe even a little swagger that God wouldn't fail them. Where's the confidence in Yahweh? When things look bad, we must make a point of remembering what God's already done. Coming up, Moses is under tremendous pressure. Verse 3. The people were thirsty for water there, and the people murmured against Moses and said, "Why have you brought us up out of Egypt, to kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst?" Moses cried to Yahweh, saying, "What shall I do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me." Comment, to be fair to the people, it could be they were extremely thirsty, but no matter how bad things get, we're still called to trust. Quote, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job 13:15. One of these days, something will bring us all the way down to the grave, and there may be suffering on the way. We should trust God all the way down. We should be careful about criticizing leaders, teachers, bosses, politicians, ministers, coaches, sporting officials, and people in any kind of responsible position. Get a lot of unfair criticism when things go the least bit sour. Let's not be so quick to join the scoffer club. Quote, "How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers." Psalm 1:1. Now Yahweh's answer, verse 5. Yahweh said to Moses, "Walk on before the people and take the elders of Israel with you, and take the rod in your hand with which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I'll stand before you there on the rock in Horeb. You shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. Comment, Moses did what? He struck the rock with his rod, and water came out. Verse 7. He called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because the children of Israel quarreled, and because they tested Yahweh, saying, "Is Yahweh among us or not?" Comment, it's a very insolent question to ask, "Is Yahweh among us or not?" So insulting to God. When things are difficult, it's time to trust and be patient, not time to question whether God's with us. Psalm 95:8 refers to this passage, quote, "Don't harden your heart as at Meribah, as in the days of Massah in the wilderness," end quote. Hebrews chapter 3 also refers to this passage. In both places, the lesson is drawn that we shouldn't harden our hearts in unbelief or will not enter God's rest. The children of Israel who complained at Massah and Meribah never rested from their anxieties about being in the desert, and they never entered the promised land. Getting ahead of the text again, God's going to kill off every adult of this generation except for 2 individuals. The bulk of the people are a warning to us. With unbelief, we'll never rest from the anxieties of trials, and much more tragically, we won't enter the kingdom of God. Massah and Meribah mean quarrel and testing. Quarreling with God and men and testing God are signs of unbelief. God's already proved himself. He will come through. We shouldn't be ugly about it in the meantime, because it's more than a problem of style. It's a problem of unbelief. We don't have to pretend everything's okay. We just need to state the belief that everything will be okay because of God. Now that the water problem is solved, verse 8. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Comment: Amalek is the nation descended from Amalek, Abraham's great-grandson. They live in the same area, probably on a nomadic basis. They're on the attack. Israel's carrying gold, silver, and clothing from Egypt. Deuteronomy 25:18 fills in some details. Amalek was raiding the Israelites who were bringing up the rear, the most feeble, faint, and weary of the bunch, and Amalek doesn't fear Yahweh. Verse 9. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose men for us and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with God's rod in my hand." Comment: that's the first mention of Joshua. Moses is 80 and Joshua much younger. Joshua will lead the fight against Amalek. Verse 10. So Joshua did as Moses had told him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Comment: Hur is one of Moses' right-hand men. About Moses holding up the rod, verse 11. When Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. When he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, the one on one side and the other on the other side. His hands were steady until sunset. Comment: when Moses keeps God's rod uplifted, the battle goes Israel's way. A difficult situation calls for a continual appeal to God, an acknowledgement of Him. Verse 13. Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Yahweh said to Moses, "Write this for a memorial in a book and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under the sky." Comment: Moses was already keeping a testimony, Exodus 16:34, meaning a written record, and in verse 14 there's another mention of a written record being kept at Yahweh's direction. Later Moses set up a priesthood and charged them with preserving his writings, Deuteronomy 31:9 and 31:26. In verse 13, Israel defeated Amalek. In response, verse 4, Moses built an altar and called its name Yahweh our banner. Comment: Israel puts the name of Yahweh on a banner and waves it, so to speak. They openly identify with Yahweh, as should we. Jesus said, quote, "He who confesses me before men, I'll also confess him before my Father who's in heaven." Matthew 10:32. Ecclesiastes 8:12, "Fear him openly," end quote. Verse 16. He said, "Yah has sworn, Yahweh will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." Comment: in verse 14, God said he would wipe out Amalek's memory from under the sky, but first there are going to be generations of warfare with them. The wiping out will come in the time of Samuel. That's the chapter. Just a little fun recap of Moses' rod here. It was his shepherding rod that he was holding in his hand when he saw the burning bush, but God co-opted it. God told him to take it to Egypt. Exodus 4:20 calls it God's rod. At God's command, it became an instrument in Moses' hand for shepherding Israel. Moses threw it down at the bush and before the people and before Pharaoh, and it became a snake. He struck the Nile with it, and it became blood. He struck the earth with it, and the dust became lice. He stretched it toward heaven, and it hailed. He stretched it over the Red Sea, and it parted, then came back together. He struck the rock at Massa and Meribah with it, and water came out. He held it over the battlefield at Amalek and won. Wouldn't it be nice to have a handy little rod like that? We do. The rod was the symbol of God's power and authority wielded by man. God's rod is still available. Jesus said, "Ask and you shall receive," John 16:24. The wilderness locations in this chapter and in coming chapters are obscure, which is understandable, being unpopulated. Israel traveled from the wilderness of Sin to Rephidim, where there was no water, which was closely associated with Massa, Meribah, the rock of Horeb, and the battlefield with Amalek. Exodus 18 is next at landofhavilah.net, Exodus 18.